Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. We've been testing hoop house soils now for probably 10 plus years, and it soon became apparent that there were a fairly unique set of problems that we were seeing with high tunnel production. And we've tried to modify our testing systems and provide new options that specifically address high tunnel soil management. And I gave this talk last fall. Since then, we've had a couple of new developments, in part because of that high tunnel symposium at the Farmer Conference. And so we're gonna kind of plug those at the end, give you a few options for testing options. Let's see here, do this right. Okay, this is the preaching to the choir portion of my talk. Any of you who are already doing high tunnels know most of this stuff already, but I'm just going to state the obvious. I do work at a university, obviously. High tunnel system is in-ground production in an enhanced environment, kind of the big picture part of it. It's not the same as open field production, although it's similar. It's not the same as greenhouse veg production, obviously, although there are some similarities with that. It's a hybrid system between open field production and greenhouse production. It's a unique system in that it relies on the basic soil fertility just as you would in open field production, but you have greatly enhanced daytime temperatures, and this leads to obviously earlier growing period in the spring, later in the fall, faster growth rates at any time of the year than you would in open field production. And this not only applies to the growing plants, but also to the soil that they're growing in. That soil is a lot warmer than it is in open field production. You have greatly enhanced breakdown and mineralization of nutrients from organic nutrient sources, compost, and other materials that you're adding to add nutrients to the soil that rely on microbial activity to break them down and release nutrients in the available form. So this whole process is speeded up in the soil as well as accelerated plant growth above the ground. And the other unique feature is that you're supplying all of the water to those growing plants. And this is a great idea, especially with tomatoes, where you have wet foliage that allows the introduction of most of the nasty foliar diseases in tomatoes, like early blight, late blight, septoria wilt, and that sort of thing. It also allows you to add nutrients to your irrigation water. Irrigation, either something you can dissolve in the water or suspend in the water, depending upon what you want to put through your drip system or your emitters. So it's a fairly unique system. And for those people who are just getting into hoop growing the first time, to get their head around this difference, I tell them that when you set foot in that house, you're not in Maine anymore. You're in the desert. Okay? This is the biggest difference between high tunnel production and open field production. This is a shot of the Central Valley. You've got some irrigated crops off here in the distance. Here's an even more extreme situation. This is fruit and vegetable production in the Negev. The Israelis have really perfected the art and science of growing fruit and vegetables on a sand dune, primarily because they perfected the art and science of drip irrigation. This is a little bit extreme for comparison of high tunnel. This is probably a little more similar. The idea is you're dealing with an arid environment, and the difference between this and open field production is anywhere east of the Mississippi, you get plenty of rainfall for the year. And the rainfall exceeds the amount of evaporation plus transpiration. In arid areas and semi-arid areas, the amount of natural rainfall plus irrigation is usually less than the total amount of transpiration from growing plants plus evaporation from the surface. So that what you need to get your head around is the fact that net movement of into soil in open field production is downward. Okay, so that's carrying any excess nutrient salt buildup. In an arid situation, that movement is upward. Most of the water will soak into the soil, but then it gets taken up by plants, or it's wicked to the surface and evaporated off. And when it wicks to the surface, it carries with it the dissolved nutrient salts and leaves them at the surface as it evaporates. So the big difference that takes most people by surprise is movement of water is not downward, it's upward in a high tunnel. Okay, unique problems other than salting, although that's the biggest, one of the biggest issues. Temperature extremes, obviously, even more extreme than open field production in the desert. You're in a closed environment, you can cook things, as you mentioned earlier, if you don't ventilate. Anything above 120 degrees is going to be lethal. This higher temperature environment can also exaggerate or exacerbate insect and disease problems. If you get powdery mildew started on your vines, that hot, humid environment is just perfect to spread that disease. You have an aphid or a mite infestation problem, it's party time. It's nice and warm in there. It can exaggerate that problem. And because of an accelerated growth rate on your plants, on your crop plants, if you have a marginal deficiency problem because of this accelerated growth rate, it's going to exaggerate that problem. So it's a double-edged sword. You have gains, but then you have equal problems that can occur because of this enhanced environment. And of course, salt buildup we mentioned already. The faster mineralization of nutrients and release of nutrients in available form adds to the total salt load of the soil. And you add to that enhanced evaporation and wicking to the surface, and you can build up the total nutrient salt level in your soil at a surprising rate. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is in open field production, nitrogen management assumes that you're losing a lot of available nitrogen. Nitrogen in the nitrate form cannot be held very well by soils. It's gone with the next rainfall, like 2009 when it never stopped raining. It was a really bad nitrogen deficiency year just because once we did get some nitrogen in the available form, in the nitrate form, it was gone for the next rainfall, which was the next day usually. In an arid situation or semi-arid situation, you don't have that leaching effect on nitrate. So nitrate level really accumulates in a high tunnel production system. And as I've said, the key to this is evaporation plus transpiration is greater than or equal to the water input. So net movement of soil water is upward, not downward. So what's the best way to manage soil fertility in this unique system? Well, there are a couple of different ways you can do this. I'm going to talk about two somewhat related but distinct testing systems. One is your traditional field soil test where you're measuring quantity of available nutrients. And the second one, which most people probably aren't too familiar with, is a soil water test where you're looking at immediately available nutrient content dissolved in the soil water. The typical field soil test is called the nutrient quantity test. The soil water test measures nutrient intensity or short-term availability. So this is your traditional field soil test that we run 10, 15, 20,000 of a year. You mix a specific weight of soil with a specific volume of extracting solution that's designed to extract the available nutrients. You shake it up for 15 minutes in this case. You filter out the solution, leave the soil behind. All of your available nutrient content in the soil is in that extracted solution, which you can then analyze. This is the plasma emission spectrometer where you can analyze all the major micronutrients simultaneously, one sample a minute, and all of your major micronutrients are in that extracted solution. And because you have a known weight of soil and a known volume of solution, you can back calculate to the concentration of available nutrients in the original dry soil sample. All general soil fertility testing programs are set up the same way. So you're measuring the capacity of the soil to supply nutrients over the entire growing season. You're measuring the nutrient reserve content of the soil with this traditional type of testing system. Treats the soil as a nutrient storehouse. How much can it supply over the entire growing season? It extracts not the total amount of nutrient in the soil, but a quantity that correlates well with actual plant uptake over the course of the growing season, and hopefully, ultimately, with yield and quality. And each testing system, and they're not all the same across the country, is calibrated by this way: nutrient uptake and yield to the critical test level for phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. And it's calibrated, interpreted, and recommendations are made according to that calibration. And regionally, here in the Northeast, we use either the original Oregon or the modified Oregon extraction procedure, which is a mild buffered acid extraction. In the Midwest and the Southeast, they use the Malate 3, which is ammonium acetate and ammonium fluoride at pH 2.5. And in semi-arid areas, they use neutral ammonium acetate and Hoskins, which is sodium bicarbonate, just a baking soda dilute solution to extract phosphorus, that deals specifically with the nutrient chemistry in those naturally alkaline soils. So there are regional differences, but in a field soil test, they're all after the same thing. They're all after quantity of available nutrients. What's the capacity of the soil to supply nutrients over the entire growing season? And this is just a typical field soil test that we put out in Maine. pH, organic matter, major nutrients, micronutrients, the current test levels relative to the optimum range up here for the specific. This is just general organic vegetable production, and then specific recommendations through our calibration system to determine what you need to supplement and in what quantities. So the other type of testing system looks at nutrient intensity or soil water and soil water content of nutrients. And I need to kind of give you a general orientation here about the relationship between the soil particles, that is organic matter, clay, sand, silt, and clay content, soil particles, the water that bathes them, and the plant roots that are taking in the nutrients. And I found this really nice pictorial designation of, or nice representation of the whole plant, soil, water relationship. Now this is the plant root, this is the soil particles here, this is probably a sand particle, this is a clay particle, this is broken down organic matter or humus, and most of the capacity of the soil to supply nutrients is determined by those nutrients that are absorbed on the surface of particles, either through cation exchange or through surface complexes or stable compounds. And this is the capacity, the reserve capacity of the soil to supply nutrients. Okay, here we have the plant root, the root hair, and we have soil water bathing the whole system, both the soil surface, the particle surfaces, and the root. And this shows the three different pathways of nutrient uptake into plants. Now there is direct interception where a root hair can go out, make contact, physical contact with the surface of a soil particle, grab the nutrient ions off, drag them away, kicking and screaming into the root and up into the plant for use in metabolism and photosynthesis. That is a fairly minor portion of actual nutrient uptake. Most of the nutrients taken into plant roots go through the soil water. And each of these nutrient ions are dissolved in the water. They float around that's why the soil water is often called the soil solution, because this is a solution, a dilute solution of nutrient ions. And there are two different pathways. One is there are specific receptors or intake pathways in the cell walls that are specific to certain nutrients and nutrient ions, and as they float through on the soil water, they meet one of these transport proteins and is pulled into the plant through the cell wall membrane. And as the nutrient levels are depleted around the root hair, one of those pesky laws of thermodynamics says that nutrient ions will go from an area of higher concentration to a lower concentration by diffusion. So as the root hair depletes the nutrient content in the water around it, it's replenished by the soil surfaces into the water, and it maintains sort of an equilibrium between the soil surfaces and the soil water. So soil water tests really only look at the nutrient ions that are dissolved in the water at the current. It's a snapshot of nutrient availability just at the current time the soil was taken, the soil sample was taken. Traditional field soil tests look at what's in the soil water plus everything that's held in reserve on the soil particle surfaces. Okay, it doesn't look at anything that's inside the sand grains. A lot of the clay particle content between the layers of the clay lattices, a lot of that is left behind. We're looking at full season availability, but we're not looking at total content. So the two different tests really are looking at two different pools of nutrients. The soil water test, just what's in the soil water itself, and then the traditional field soil test also looks at the reserve content of the soil particle surfaces. So let's see if I left anything out. Okay, nutrient cations, calcium, potassium, magnesium have a plus charge. Anions, nitrate, phosphate, sulfate have negative charges. And the actual amount of these nutrients in that soil water is a relatively small proportion of the total available content. And as I said, as the plant root takes those in, it depletes the soil water content, and those are replenished by the soil particle surfaces, either from exchange sites or from the release from stable compounds, as was in the case of phosphorus and sulfur, or from the breakdown of organic matter and the release of nutrients through microbial activity. So there are a couple different ways we can test soil water for its nutrient content. But in either case, we're only looking at immediate availability. It does not address long-term capacity to supply nutrients. So one of the ways to do this is to do a pore water test. You take a certain amount of a specific weight of field moist soil, you put it in a centrifuge tube, and you spin the bejeebers out of it for about an hour. This was 50 grams of soil, of field moist soil, and I spun this for an hour at 30 times gravity. And you can't really see it from here, but what it does is it packs the soil down, and the pore water gets exuded towards the surface, which you can pour off and analyze. And the line between the soil and the water that was in it is right here. Only gave me a couple of milliliters of solution to work with. This is not a practical way of analyzing soil water content. It's used in experimental, under experimental conditions. You know, if you got plenty of time to do this, you can do a direct measurement of soil pore water. What is used in a production system is the saturated media extract. You take the soil as it comes in, you don't dry it, you don't sit it. You take 150, 200 cc's, 300 cc's, whatever is the named volume, you put it in a closed container, and you add just enough water to saturate it. Okay, so this is full of water just to the surface. You can see the surface glistening. You don't want any standing water on top. That's the saturation moisture content of the soil. This depends, and this is going to be different from one soil to the next. It depends on clay content, organic matter content. The saturation moisture content automatically takes into account the moisture retention characteristics of that soil. Now, you could say this doesn't really look like what I'm going to be working with in the field, but what it does have is a constant relationship to what's called field capacity. Field capacity is when you saturate the soil and allow it to drain by gravity. It's the maximum amount of water that the soil can hold once it's drained against the pull of gravity. So it is a constant relationship. Saturation moisture content is almost exactly double what the soil will hold at field capacity. So you always have that constant relationship between saturation moisture content and field capacity. That's how this system works. So you filter off the water by vacuum, and then you have a water extraction of the soil that has this constant relationship to the soil water at field capacity. Now, as I said, this is going to vary depending upon texture and organic matter content. This is from 150 cc's of a sandy loam soil. We've got about 15 milliliters of solution to work with there. This is from another 150 cc's of a greenhouse potting mix. Very highly organic, very high moisture retention capacity. And from the same 150 cc's of soil, this is the amount of soil water that we can extract. But it's different amounts, but it has the same constant relationship to moisture retention and field capacity, roughly 2 times. So we take that solution and we can analyze it for pH, we can analyze it for total salt content, all the measured micronutrients, similar to what we do in a field soil test. But obviously, it's going to be interpreted differently, so there are a whole different set of guidelines to interpret test results from a saturated media extract. You have an example, it's not exactly this one, but there's an example that you have that shows the level found. Now this is not parts per million in the dry soil as a field soil sample is. This is parts per million in that extracted solution. Okay, so you're looking at the soil water content and the nutrients dissolved in it, not at the dry soil that it's in equilibrium with. So there's an entirely different set of interpretive guidelines because you're looking at soil water and not the soil as a whole. This is just a quick example. But the basic idea that I'm trying to get across here is this is solution level content as opposed to dry soil content in a traditional field soil. Yeah?
But your traditional test extracted it with water though, right?
It's extracted with ammonium acetate.
That's the difference.
Yeah, it's a more stringent extract than water. The question was, do we extract in a field soil test with water? We don't. We use a more stringent extract. It's that modified Morgan, which is ammonium acetate, pH 4.8. Right? It's meant to strip the surface reserve nutrient content from the soil particle surfaces. Yeah.
But for neither of the tests are looking at long-term nutrients that are in complex organic molecules or complex.
The field soil test is really looking at a 1 to 2 year availability window. It doesn't look at for the next 10 years. It's a finite window. That's why we're telling people for routine field soil tests to extract or to sample every 2 to 3 years, right, to make sure that your reserves are being maintained. Okay, so the saturated media extract is used in a number of different situations. It was originally used mostly in the commercial greenhouse industry for peat-based potting mixes where most of the nutrient capacity, most of the nutrients are supplied as water-soluble nutrients, Miracle Grow or something like that. Simple salts dissolved in water. Really, in a conventional greenhouse situation, the potting mix is just a rooting media. It's something that gives the plant's roots something to grow in. It's also a water-holding medium. The potting mix holds the water, which holds the water-soluble nutrients. And that's how soil fertility is managed, isn't strictly looking at water-soluble nutrients. And the saturated media extract was really designed originally to work with that type of scenario. The other situation where it comes in handy is to test those soils where the nutrient content content exceeds the capacity of the soil to hold nutrients. And this is just a quick pictorial representation where you have the soil particle surfaces, clay, organic matter, humus. Here are all your binding sites, cation exchange sites, complexing sites, and you can see the whole thing, that all of the complexing sites are fully loaded. That soil is loaded to capacity. It can't absorb or bind any more nutrients, and still you have plenty of free nutrients out here in the soil water or the soil solution. And as I said before, saturated media really is accessing only this pool of nutrients out here, and pretty much leaving these alone, which are accessed in the field soil test. So, in situations where nutrient retention has been exceeded in the soil, this happens in heat-based potting mixes, obviously, in conventional bench production. It also includes organic greenhouse production, where a lot of the nutrients are coming from compost that's mixed with peat. You still have a lot of free nutrient ions. You have limited nutrient retention capacity. It still is a useful test, even for organic greenhouse production. That is benchtop production. And the other place where it comes in handy is where soils that have accumulated nutrient salts at the surface, as in irrigated desert soils, and by extension, our high tunnel soils that have been in production for a while. So, as a matter of fact, in the arid in the desert soils, like in the picture I showed you of the Negev, the saturated media extract is the standard field soil test that's used in the Central Valley of California, the Negev Desert in Israel, and other desert production areas. Okay, so we've got field soil tests. We have soil water tests. What's the best system to use to manage high tunnel soil fertility? Well, I'm going to give you the standard university extension answer. It depends. It always depends on the details. We have a lot of different management scenarios with high tunnels. The simple one is for a brand spanking new tunnel that you're just putting in. You're really still in the field soil management situation. So just a routine field soil test is your best management, your best soil testing tool to use to adjust your pH, your organic matter level, and your basic nutrient content before you plant and start putting that tunnel into production. You want to optimize your pH, your organic matter level, your major micronutrients. It's a routine field soil test. Okay, for established high tunnels, it gets more complicated. Some tunnels are used only for 1 year and then they're moved. This one's moved out here every year, right? On common ground?
Oh, I don't know. Andrew? Moved every year?
It's moved every year. So you're not going to have a salt buildup issue in a tunnel that's moved every year. In that type of situation, you just keep with a field soil test, and that would be an adequate management strategy. But if you have a tunnel that's been in place for a couple of years, 3 years or more, then you have to start worrying about nutrient salt buildup at the surface, and you have to start worrying about nitrate accumulation. You don't have that leaching effect, and this really takes people by surprise is how fast the salt level can build up, how fast the nitrate level can build up, which is one of the soluble salts, obviously. And so you need to start monitoring that. So we have a variety of houses, a variety of management scenarios. Some people roll up the sides to the peak and let natural rain fall at that soil. We try to get people to do that if possible, but if you're double cropping a winter crop and a high heat crop in the summer, that doesn't leave you much of a window to leave that tunnel uncovered. But if it is possible, the best way is to let Mother Nature take care of that salt buildup, just like out in an open field the sides up to the peak and let it get rained down several times, several inches worth of rainfall. That's probably the best and easiest way to do it. A lot of people aren't in that situation where they can do that. Some people move it after every year, some every 2 years, some every 3 years, some can't move it at all because of their particular situation. There's so many different scenarios that it's really difficult to choose the right one. Really, it comes down to whether you can leach that soil regularly, either through natural rainfall or by flood irrigation or by overhead irrigation, sprinkling irrigation several inches to flush those salts down through. If you can regularly leach that soil or flush that soil, then a field soil-based testing system is probably the best way to go. For continuously covered houses, where you're going to have a salt buildup, then a soil water basis test, a saturated media extract, is probably the best way to go. And we do now have 2 different ways of testing high tunnel field soils. The first one that we put online a couple of years ago was to address nutrient reserves and also to address salt buildup and nitrate accumulation. It's just a basic high tunnel field soil test, field soil based test where we're extracting the reserve nutrients. We're giving you the reserve nutrient content as we would for open field production, but we're also running a saturated media extract to measure the total soluble salts, and then we're measuring the available nitrogen content, nitrate plus ammonium, to give you a handle on whether you're building up nitrate to a high level or even an alarming level. And this is just an example, 1-year-old tunnel. I believe I gave you a copy of this. This is a 1-year-old tunnel. This doesn't look much different from just an open field management situation. They didn't really load the soil in this tunnel when they started it up, and it actually still needs some adjustment in pH and the basic nutrient content. And you're going to get recommendations just as if it were a field soil. We do monitor the salt content here. It's at 0.42. It's less than 2 millimoles. It's not a problem. It's very low level. There really is no salt buildup here yet. The nitrate level is at 19 parts per million. Ideal is somewhere around 20 to 50 parts per million. So it's really just a little bit on the low edge of optimum for available nitrogen. So this is a very good situation to use the field soil-based basic high tunnel test that we've provided now for several years. But what about this one? Everything is off the page high. I don't think I gave you an example of this. The idea is that everything is off the page high. You've got 300 parts per million of nitrate. You've got 275 pounds of phosphorus. This thing is loaded. Okay. Our salt level is a little bit over 3. You have 294 parts per million of nitrate. This has obviously been in production for quite a while. And actually, I threw this in both as an example of an established hoop, but also this is one of our regular customers. I know this house had been in production for over 10 years. The year before this, his salt level was up to 8 millimoles. He was seeing some real salt damage problems on his greens and even on his tomatoes and peppers. And he was in a situation where he could not uncover it. He couldn't move it. He's disabled and he's working in raised beds and or slightly raised beds. And so he had a very unique way of taking care of the salt problem here. He knew somebody on the local fire department. And when they cycle their tankers, they have to empty out the tankers, flush out the rust, and then fill it with fresh water at fairly irregular intervals, I think probably about once a month. So he said, when you empty your tanker, you come up and flood my greenhouse. And he sealed the baseboards around, either with plastic or with soil, and they put 4, 5, 6 inches of water in this whole house, and slowly percolated down through, and he got his salt level from over 8 down to 3. So if you know somebody on the local fire department, you might want to make them an offer. a little bit more typical of an established high tunnel. This has, most of the nutrients are quite high, potassium being the big exception here. For most of these nutrients, we probably should be looking at the water soluble levels rather than the reserve levels. We're getting into that management situation where we've got a lot of free salts here. So what we have now is a second option for high tunnels, for long-term established high tunnels. This is something that we've added on just this spring. It's coming out on our new, as an option on our new field forms. It's a saturated media-based extraction system, but we're also addressing one of the common things that we do in a field soil test, which is to look at organic matter content. So it's basically a saturated media extract plus an organic matter. And this is something that one of the people who spoke at last fall's high tunnel symposium was Dr. Vern Grubinger, University of Vermont. He's worked with the high tunnel growers in Vermont for over 20 years. And he really prefers, because they've been, I think their history of high tunnel production is a little longer than here in Maine. He runs into a lot more of these scenarios of long-term usage and high salt buildup. He really prefers the saturated media extract. He has interpretation guidelines and recommendations that go along with it. And we've been kind of back and forth about this for the last month or so, but we now have a coherent package that we're offering for Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire growers, high tunnel growers. The saturated media extract, and it has a specific interpretation guidelines for high tunnel production. And then the example that you have is the previous one. This is exactly the same soil. This is the field soil-based testing system. Oops. And this is the saturated media-based system. So this is the same soil run through both systems. And you can see the pH, the soluble salts are pretty close to the same in either system. The organic matter is measured the same way, so that's the same in both systems. But the water soluble, the soil water levels are much lower for most of the nutrients in the saturated media extract than they are in the field soil system. That's what you would expect. But in both of these cases, it's labeling or flagging potassium as being a really limiting nutrient. Since they're growing tomatoes in this situation, that's not a good thing. Tomatoes require a pretty high potassium status in soil. So both systems are flagging a potassium deficiency here, but in different ways. Interpretation levels are completely different and separate and unique to each system. This is the recommendation system that goes along with the saturated media long-term high tunnel system. And these are years of experience through Vern's work over in Vermont. These are the amounts of organic nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium amendments that are needed per 1,000 square feet to raise the saturated media content by 10 parts per million for nitrogen, 2 parts per million for phosphorus, and 20 parts per million for potassium. So if you look on the white saturated media report, the potassium level is only at 16 parts per million. We want to be somewhere up over 200, ideally in a saturated media extract. So we want to add about 200 parts per million of potassium to that test level. So for every 20 parts per million, you need 1.1 pounds of potassium sulfate. We want to go 200 parts per million, so it's just 10 times this rate. So we need about 11 pounds of potassium sulfate per 1,000 square feet to get that potassium level in that saturated media extract to that optimal range. Now if we go back to the field soil test, which also showed a potassium deficiency, we're recommending 10 pounds of potassium sulfate on 1,000 square feet. I swear I didn't make that up, it just happened. So they're both flagging potassium deficiency. They both wind up with about the same amount of potassium amended recommended for organic production. So it's two different ways of getting at the same thing, but where you have a lot of free salt content, it's probably better to go with long-term established high tunnel that you haven't been able to leach regularly, to go with a saturated media extract, the long-term high tunnel package. So we have two different options now. Actually, three different options. For a brand new tunnel, just a routine basic field soil test. For one that's regularly leached, or only been in production for a year or two, the field soil-based high tunnel package, the basic high tunnel package. And for long-term established high tunnels, probably the long-term high tunnel package would be most appropriate. It looks at water side levels. We have three options now for high tunnel soil fertility management. Okay, I slipped in something sneaky here. These two example reports are replicate one in a brand spanking new high tunnel soil test calibration project that has only happened almost by serendipity in the last couple of weeks. Vern had the opportunity of a free paid for intern for the summer, so he's working with one of the cooperating growers in Vermont, and he's putting in a very extensive set of experimental plots with 3 different rates of nitrogen. It's a blood meal and soybean meal combination, a low, medium, and high rate of nitrogen, a low, medium, and high rate of potassium using sulfate and potash, and then all 3 combinations with each other, and then using compost only as a control. So all the plots get compost, and then 9 of the 10 plots in each replicate get some combination of 3 rates of nitrogen and 3 rates of potassium. It's a randomized complete block, 6 replications. You have replicate block 1, pre-treatment in your hands. We're going to be taking, obviously, tomato yield, and also we're going to be doing leaf tissue testing to measure the actual nutrient uptake of the plants as they're growing. And we're going to be doing saturated medium-based extracts 2 or 3 times during the growing season, and then the field soil-based test at both ends, using both testing systems. So what we're going to do is to calibrate both testing systems and to refine that recommendation system that I just showed you, to see whether that's from his experience. Here we're really nailing it down, doing it scientifically. So hopefully a year from now we'll be able to refine both systems. So that's something that's happened just in the last couple of weeks, specifically for high tunnel production. It's been a really nice collaborative effort between several of us here in the Northeast. Any questions on general soil fertility? Yeah.
On your recommendations on the second soil test, for nitrogen, you asked for 100 pounds of meal. So does that mean that you're asking for 10 pounds of potassium? Does that mean that you can't get all of your nitrogen needs from alfalfa meal because you really bring the potassium off together?
Well, in a field, this is a field, the question was the recommendation of alfalfa meal in the field soil-based reporting system. That's both a nitrogen and a potassium-based fertilizer. And in situations like this where we're recommending alfalfa meal as for both nitrogen and potassium, it takes quite a bit. It's a low-yield fertilizer, nutrient source. So we're recommending it's an either or. Okay, if you don't want to use blood meal and you don't want to use soybean meal, if you're using alfalfa meal as your primary potassium source, you don't need the other sources of nitrogen. Okay, it's a trade-off type of situation.
So does that add 100 pounds of alfalfa meal could meeting that measurement needs to far exceed capacity.
Not necessarily. It's only about 2% potassium, so that's only going to give you 20 pounds. Let's see, 2 pounds of actual potassium, which is about the same as well. It's not actually you want to supply enough potassium. There's 10 pounds of potassium sulfate, which is 50%. So that's 5 pounds of actual potassium sulfate, or let's see, or 2 pounds of potassium from alfalfa meal. So you probably need to supplement a little bit more potassium over and above the alfalfa meal. The alfalfa meal rate is based on the nitrogen requirement. Yeah, that's what it's based on.
We have time for questions.
Okay, I have one more thing I want to talk about real quick. Everybody's getting hungry. This talk was billed as soil health. We've talked almost exclusively about soil chemistry, soil nutrient chemistry, which is certainly important in soil health, certainly important in managing organic matter. But for the first time this year, we are able to provide an entirely biological test added to our repertoire. This is a Salvia-based system that was developed at Woods End Lab originally for monitoring monitoring microbial activity in compost. It's the Salvia system that measures carbon dioxide in a short-term incubation. SOLVITA. That's their. They've used this for a number of years on. They've sold these kits for monitoring whether compost is finished or not. But they've adapted it to the somewhat lower levels of carbon dioxide that come off from soil microbial activity. This is a 24-hour incubation. It's based on taking dried and sieve soil and re-wetting it. Now, for almost 100 years, people have realized that when you re-wet dried soil, you get this massive burst of microbial activity in the first 24 to 48 hours. And that's what this system is based on. You're taking dried and sieve soil, which is what we're analyzing in the lab already. You take 40 grams in one of these little plastic beakers that has holes bored in the bottom, put a membrane in, 40 grams of soil on top. You put it in the vessel and you add 25 milliliters of distilled water. And the soil will wick the water up just to feel the capacity all on its own from the bottom. So it automatically adjusts the moisture content to the ideal level. You put in one of these carbon dioxide sensitive paddles, which start out really deep dark blue, and they go to green and then to bright yellow as more and more carbon dioxide is given off. So in 24 hours, you can accurately monitor the total amount of microbial biomass and the biological health of your soil in just a 24-hour test. We're offering this as an add-on to either a basic soil test, standard soil test, a comprehensive soil test that includes available nitrogen, and to the basic high tunnel package, just a $10 add-on. I've got a few examples in the back corner over here, some jars set up that compare an organic garden to a commercial potato field to an organic high tunnel. Just if you want to take a look at it. And this is the interpretation that goes along with it. It's based on the parts per million of carbon dioxide that come off in 24 hours. And it gives you a very low, moderate, very high microbial biomass. And this will be, or something like this will be what goes out with the report to interpret those the results from that test. So this is something that we're finally able to provide an entirely microbial assay of the soil as a nice, quick, convenient add-on that meshes very nicely with our system. So I just wanted to let people know that that's available. Now I'm ready for questions. Yeah.
So you got your soil test back, and do you have any
uncovered to remediate it. Really depends on the relative level of salt. If you're way up over 8, then you need to go to some extreme measures. But if you're up to 3 or 4 or 5, if you can allow that, leave that uncovered for just a month or two, basically you want to have it be rained on probably 3, 4, 5 inches worth of rainfall for adequate leaching. It doesn't have to be uncovered for like 6 months. It really depends on the frequency and intensity of rainfall while it's uncovered. Okay. Again, there's a lot of different, there's a whole spectrum from extreme to just moderate problem. But the more often you can uncover your house, whether it's when you redo the poly every three years or so, as long as it's not too extreme, that should be sufficient if you can leave it uncovered for a month or so. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is earthworm activity affected by high salts?
It can be, yes. And actually your overall productivity can be affected as well, even if you're not seeing extreme wilting or nutrient deficiency symptoms. Basically, you can have some hidden stress from just the plants trying to pull water in against that osmotic gradient of a high salt content in the soil. Also in the back, there's a couple of handouts on relative salt tolerance of different crops. And where this is more of an issue in field production in the arid desert areas where salt accumulation is a common problem. So that's been pretty well researched as far as the salt tolerance in western states. And they have like, the level at which you see like a 25% yield loss. And it's a stepwise progression from bad to worse, basically. Yeah.
How does the application of compost and mulch affect the situation?
The question was, how does compost affect the overall salt level? It depends on the source of the compost. Seafood-based compost tend to have a higher salt content in the finished compost. And some of the worst salt levels I've seen have been in organic production systems where they were relying very heavily on crab or fish-based compost and at very high levels, like 25 to 50% by volume every year. And after 3 years, his salad greens came up and died. And he had just massive salt levels from using nothing much more than compost.
But what if you're using compost that you created from your garden waste and maybe some of your own manure into a very raggy form of mulch that you're using, say, anywhere from 2 to 4 inches around?
So you're using it as a mulch rather than as a soil mat?
Absolutely, that was the question.
Well, actually, as it sits there, we are talking about water-soluble salt content here, so that the salt content will wash down through your mulch and into the soil. But with a manure-based compost system, it's usually nowhere near as extreme as with seafood-based compost. The soluble salts are really something that will wash through with water. That's why you can flush it out of your soil with water. But also if you're using, whether you're incorporating it or just using it as a mulch, you're still going to get the salt effect from your compost. Yeah.
I got compost and I use oak leaves, like 1,000 yards, and I use hospital, but I never did get any worms in it at all.
Oak leaves, they probably break down pretty slowly, don't they?
Yeah, you have to rotate it a lot. I use lime sometimes to get it, try to break it down even fast.
Oak leaves have a lot of tannins, so they're going to break down slowly.
And even if the stuff's 12 years old, it doesn't have any worms in it.
There may be some antagonism there to earthworms from the tannins in the oak leaves.
Okay, all right.
Typically, earthworms will come in where there's leaf mold content. They really love that as a food source and source of organic matter. I haven't had any direct experience with oak leaves, but it wouldn't surprise me because of their tannin content.
Oak leaf mulch is used sometimes.
Is it cutworms? John says that oak leaf mulch is antagonistic to cutworms.
I don't have any information about either of those.
But apparently there is some antagonism there.
Yes,
I think it must have to do with the tannin content.
And I test, it would have been my guess too.
Yeah. Unscientific guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cost for the high tunnel test, and if you take out of state one?
We have a couple of customers actually in Anchorage, Alaska. So yeah, we run soil tests from anywhere that's appropriate. Certainly the desert Southwest, our test methods would be appropriate. But for a saturated media high tunnel test, actually both the basic high tunnel test and the long-term high tunnel test are both $22. And it's complete salts, pH, organic matter, major micronutrients. It's just that the nutrient test levels are based one on field soil test and the other on saturated media, but we price them both the same. And yeah, we'll run high tunnel tests for anywhere.
Is that for one sample, or do you take multiple samples within various beds within the high?
As far as soil sampling is concerned, you want to take a composite sample from several beds. Hopefully you've managed them fairly uniformly. It's not like the home gardeners that have 30 different raised beds that they've treated differently and they want to know which ones. But yeah, if you're managing fairly uniformly in the high tunnel, so a little bit from each of the beds for a composite sample for your entire tillage depth. And that'll be a representative sample.
I got extremely high on everything. This is outside the greenhouse, okay? And extremely high, but I'm low on nitrogen. So I just use blood meal to bring it back.
Blood meal is a good mid-season source of nitrogen. It's fast release. Be careful because you can burn plants with it. Yeah, very high nutrient levels for everything, but nitrogen is something I'm seeing more and more of, where people are relying almost entirely on compost as a nutrient source. We try to encourage people to use compost as an organic matter amendment. It will give you nutrient benefit, but not necessarily in the proper proportion. Okay, and it's been fairly common to see in beds and gardens and houses where they use a lot of compost and not much else for nutrient source, that they're running short on nitrogen. And that's part of the reason why we instituted the comprehensive soil test for mid-season from the end of May to the first part of September, where we're actually measuring the immediately available nitrogen content. And that's really weeded out a lot of these situations where we're seeing really high levels, 200-300 pounds of phosphorus, calcium and magnesium off the page, and no nitrogen. Almost nothing for availability, because especially the first year after you apply compost, you're really not going to get enough nitrogen out of compost alone. You need to supplement. Animal manure compost, it's going to be a difference in degree, okay? But animal manure compost, you still may need to supplement the first year. Now, it's an accumulative effect, so if you're applying a little bit of compost every year, you're going to get a little bit from what you applied this year, you're going to get a little bit from what you applied last year, a little bit from what you applied 3 years ago, so it's an accumulative effect. Where people are running into problems is they go out and they put compost on for the first time and expect they're going to get all the nitrogen they need that first year. It just doesn't happen. But as an accumulative effect, you're probably in better shape than somebody who's using compost for the first time at a very high rate.
Could you speak to the extent of nitrate accumulations in particularly fast-growing greens under typically low light levels in the winter, and given that there could be high concentrations of nitrates in your hoop house soil too?
Right. That's something that I've worried about. The question was about nitrate accumulation in the soil and the implications in some of the salad greens. Particularly spinach is a notorious nitrate accumulator, and there are some growers that are really concerned about this. I spoke to one actually in Portland last week who's going to send some spinach, some bitter greens in for us to check the nitrate level, just to make sure that it's not too high. High nitrate can be a problem, and I don't know exactly what the critical level is crops. In water, it's 10 parts per million. In food crops, I imagine it would be much higher than that. But really high nitrate levels can be a problem, especially for infants. You get the blue baby syndrome from having too much nitrate in the bloodstream. Actually, the nitrate is reduced to nitrite in the gut, and that actually complexes with hemoglobin and limits its oxygen carrying capacity in the bloodstream. So it basically starts to break down your hemoglobin activity in the blood.
So there still is a pretty serious health concern about it, but we're not really paying attention to it as a culture right now? Or?
I don't think so, no. I know it was back in the old days, commercial greens production. That was unfortunately a common practice, was just before you harvested your spinach, you want to give it that really nice dark green color so people would buy it right up. You go out and you dump some ammonium nitrate on it, green it right up till it's almost black. And they were having problems actually with nitrate toxicity, and especially some of the smaller children that were eating. That was 30 plus 40 years ago. I never had any direct experience with it. It's something that Willie Earhart told me about. It was a practice that they did away with specifically because of that. But with some of these high tunnel productions, I'm starting to worry about it. It may be inadvertently coming back to it again. It might be worth getting some of your produce checked for actual nitrate content.
So you can do that at the University of Maine?
Yeah, we do nitrate testing. Actually, we do it all summer long for potato petioles for nitrogen management. It's just a simple water extraction. It's a $15 test, something like that. But that is something that we can do. Yeah.
So then you can plant spinach just to denitrate your soil? No, you do.
I've heard of phytoremediation for lead, never for nitrate.
No, but then you take the black spinach and throw it in your compost, and then you get it back again, right?
You get it back again, yes, but I mean it would be in a more stable organic form. But I mean it would be easier just to leach your soil.
Oh.
A little more faster and cheaper, yeah.
Bruce, are you going to be around in the afternoon?
Yeah, I'll be around this afternoon.
That's great. Abby, are we ready for lunch?
We're gonna take like 10 minutes to set up lunch, so you can work on your evaluation, or you can take a little stroll outside, and then it'll be obvious when lunch is ready.
Okay, that's the word. 10 minutes, we're going to have lunch. You're going to move in on the left side of that screen. Thank you.